today we'll have our first keynote from Oti Vogt, which brings us a little of a Tina Turner flavor to organizations. So Oti Vogt has 20 years of experience in implementing strategic business change in multicultural complex businesses and has a proven record in building high-performing teams to deliver sustainable value and happiness at work. I love that combination of value and happiness through this human-centric learning organizations. So let's bring him in and welcome him and how we'll be crafting organizations of the future. Oti?
Muchas gracias, Jose. Can you hear me? Wonderful. So thank you very much indeed. And what an inspirational start. And I have to say, it's really a great pleasure to be here with you and a privilege to speak at such a wonderful conference in these historic times. And I'm very, very happy to be here with many leaders and managers already looking at some of the comments, because I truly hope this will become a decade of more enlightened leadership. I feel quite strongly, and maybe some in the audience as well, that in these days of anxiety, of big questions, of challenges and pressures, of risk opportunities, and some truly momentous redefinitions like seldom before, organizations need guidance. And not only organizations, but maybe also our society at large. And I believe we as business leaders have a unique opportunity and also a responsibility to step beyond ourselves and maybe also to support each other with lessons learned and kind of new ideas to shape a more sustainable future. But I have to admit, I also feel that many of the topics that I've seen on the agenda have been around for quite some time, and I think it's really time to get going. So we got our toes in the water, but we now really need to pull through. So when a fellow in the team asked me to come along to you guys, I immediately said yes. And I hope that in the next 30 minutes or 40 minutes, we can explore a little bit how together we could try to put that little dent in the universe, as Steve Jobs once suggested. But again, and following on Jose, before we start, I would really love to check in a little bit with all of you and connect, because otherwise, it doesn't feel like that community that we want to create. And it's always a challenge in these virtual settings. So maybe, Jose, if we could ask people to follow up on your first question on the chat with just maybe kind of two things. Where are you dialing in from this morning? And on a scale from 0 to 10, how important do you think leadership is in regards to transforming businesses and society? So where do people come from? So you get a little bit of a feel of kind of who we all are. And then 0 to 10, how relevant is leadership for the challenges ahead? And Jose, I'm going to rely on you for reading out some of the comments.
So we're going to have to, we're kind of, all right, so we're still waiting for some answers here in the stage. Let's see. So it's where you're from and 1 through 10. So we got here, oh, wow, we got an 11. We got some from Hungary, New York, we got a 10. We have from Prague 10. Oh, man, the 10s are just rolling in. I got in Ireland with a 7, some 9s, some 8s. UK representing. Romania with a 10. Berlin with an 8.5, very specific. I like that.
All right, very nice. Thank you, Jose. Muchas gracias. That probably means I'm in the right place, which of course it consoles me. And please do us a favor for both Jose and myself and your fellow leaders in the audience. Continue to put some things on the chat. Otherwise, we will not get this co-creation, right? So what are your thoughts, your comments, opinions? Let's put them on. And then later we will pick them all up in the Q&A and see how we all think about the topic. But then, without further ado, let us dive into that wonderful world of business transformation. Because as I said, our world is becoming very, very complex. And I would like to ponder with you about a conundrum that has certainly kept me personally awake during the last 10 years or so, which is how can we create organizations where work is truly meaningful and where we both enjoy our daily jobs and contribute to a sustainable future for our company, our sector, and society at large. And I do believe this is important whilst this so-called fourth industrial revolution is literally taking the world by its ears, our organizations have collectively produced numerous outcomes that nobody really wanted. There's burnout and loneliness, inequality and hunger, and ecological collapse. And by some estimates, more than $7 trillion are wasted every single year globally due to employee disengagement. And if that wasn't enough, whilst mankind is facing a historic inflection point, 56% of global citizens believe capitalism does more harm than good. Hence, I really think we need to take a step back and reflect. And I would like to share with you a few thoughts on 3 simple questions. Firstly, why are we really here? Secondly, how can we evolve our organizations to achieve our true purpose? And thirdly, who do we, each of us individually, need to become in order to make it work? And interestingly, maybe you as well, I very often encounter people who tell me very earnestly that they deeply desire to become more agile or teal without ever asking themselves the question, why? And that is not really surprising, is it? We have created that seductively materialistic and individualistic narrative in our Western society where often self-interested growth, productivity, and stock prices have become ends in themselves. In a pandemic of busyness, we've often succumbed to that hedonistic treadmill of money for money's sake. And people start to work ever longer hours to attain status or social acceptance or wealth, just to find out that it does not really make them any happier. And in creating ever greater riches, arguably for far too few, we've often ignored ecologic externalities just to discover that our mother planet is at the brink of bankruptcy and that the collapse of global climate will threaten the livelihoods of millions. So what do we really believe in? What do we really stand for? And those questions, I believe, are both existential and fundamental. We create organizations for a purpose, to achieve something together, which we couldn't possibly achieve individually. And I quite strongly believe that 50 years after that famous Milton Friedman essay on business, both personal and organizational success must transcend a quest for money and shareholder value. As Colin Meyer maintained at the World Economic Forum in Davos this year, which feels like years ago, the true purpose of organizations is to solve the planet's problems profitably. It's not just about profit and endless growth, but also about an inclusive and sustainable economy for all stakeholders, and about becoming those good ancestors for the generations to come. Not just bigger, but better. And I think in a world where traditional communities of churches and neighborhoods have been eroded, where scientific management has often filled gaps of meanings with the gospel of growth, and where work has become so central in our lives, where some organizations are like small states, I believe businesses also have to step up. And as Immanuel Kant, the great philosopher, warned us a century ago, human beings must always be treated as end in themselves, never as means, never as cogs in a machine. And frankly, not as a question of marketing or charity, but as a matter of morality and justice. Exploitation and inequality are not economic laws, but inherent failures of our economic system. And I think we must evolve societal and organizational success measures beyond GDP and profit before tax. And therefore, I think we all should ask ourselves, are we and our companies net contributors to that quadruple bottom line? Are we making a meaningful and measurable difference? Do we have explicit decision-making processes in place? And do we create that reflective space to evaluate and balance major projects against our values? And if not, let us take action. Managers and leaders cannot, I believe, remain morally mute when our very existence on this planet is at stake. Today, we need human-centric and ecocentric organizations more than ever to provide a place of meaning and community where people can grow and flourish and attain that positive collective purpose together. And I actually have to say, I believe many people today agree with such an ambition, but struggle to understand how to evolve from where they are today. And as a result, change is quite slow. And frankly, whatever consultants might sometimes suggest, there are no simple answers. Like people, every organization is different. However, I strongly do believe that we cannot just continue as before. We live in an ever more complex world, facing ever faster changes, advances in technology and data, shortening half-life of knowledge, and ever greater global interdependencies. Some researchers maintain that 65% of the future professions of people entering primary school today do not even yet exist. So in these new 20s, I think we have to let go of the illusion that work can be predicted or planned in detail. As BCG suggested last year, the companies that will win in the 2020s are those who can compete on learning. From a paradigm of scalable efficiency that has very much dominated our businesses since the Industrial Revolution, we need to move to a new world of scalable learning and development. From competitive advantage to adaptive advantage, and from closed systems to boundary-less ecosystems. And the simple truth is that our world has simply become too complex to be controlled through bureaucracy. We cannot stand on a mountain top and preach strategy down the hills to achieve successful execution. Hence, I think we need to revise how to create organizations that can both compete successfully and attain that purpose we desire. And those liberated organizations of the future must be able to create an environment where people can and want to make a difference in order to harness ideas from everywhere. In order to thrive, we need to both embrace uncertainty and maximize human flourishing at work, rather than just driving efficiency and productivity. And how do we get there? So in my experience, if we truly want to enable self-organization and that organizational learning at scale and move towards the teal paradigm, we need to have the courage to redesign work, adapting the context for our teams at multiple levels holistically in terms of the structure, management processes, and organizational practices. And above all, I think instead of moving those proverbial deck chairs on the Titanic and redrawing org charts, we need to very consciously revise the distribution of information, knowledge, and power. Existing systems very often distort or suppress information. And I think in the future, we need to move information not just upwards, but everywhere. As they say at VC, radical transparency should prevail. Everything is public unless it's harmful, so that strategy becomes a firm-wide conversation. And in terms of power and structure, central authority simply does not lend itself to decentralized experimentation and learning. At ING, we were one of the first banks to roll out Agile at scale globally. And as I think we demonstrated, Agile can provide more flexibility within that pyramid, enabling self-organization and cross-functional flows of information and decision-making. But I've also seen many Agile transformations struggle because they never dealt with the existing power or ownership structures. And following on from Agile, I believe we will see much more ambidextrous organizations that can enable the exploitation of the existing and the exploration of the new. But it won't stop there. We are already witnessing experiments with meshed and adaptive networks of teams, market-oriented ecosystems and micro-enterprises like in Hire, and interconnected circles in holacracy and sociocracy. And in terms of management processes, organizational learning requires both order and freedom. And Bill Torbett spoke here about liberating structures like principles and roles, routines, rituals, methodologies to enable and host that generative dialogue involving as many people as possible. And often forgotten, learning also entails mechanisms to manage creative tension and conflict. Innovation is at its heart creative destruction. And if we just sweep disagreements under the carpet, we will be ruined by our own empathy. However, by its very nature, total consensus would overwhelm a complex system, and hence we need procedures to explicitly foster that collaboration across diversity and attain not consensus, but consent. And finally, I think we must adapt sometimes anachronistic HR and finance processes. Support functions must become agile, but not just by organizing in tribes and squads, but by adapting their support processes to truly enable learning at scale. And a lot of these processes carry symbolic valence and have a huge impact. And one process that I believe requires some special attention is performance management, as it is often the cornerstone of a somewhat outdated behaviorist worldview. And here in terms of target setting, rather than just having top-down cascades of numerous KPIs at the beginning of the year, trying to control the uncontrollable, I think we need to invest in bottom-up contracting for individuals and teams, not only about kind of what we do, but also how we work with each other. And in finance, I think we need to evolve sometimes rigid financial midterm planning and resource allocation towards that beyond budgeting. And certainly from annual goals, we should move towards recurrent sprints. And in terms of performance feedback, here I think engagement needs to become truly continuous and much more facilitate self-reflection, peer coaching, and evolve from feedback towards more strength-based feed forward. And focus moves from individual high performers towards team dynamics. As Manfred Kitz de Vries is always saying, many leadership teams are dysfunctional. And for the appraisals, I really think we need to revise those ratings and rankings. There's ample literature out there to prove they simply do not work. And finally, in terms of leadership development and promotion, I really think we need to move towards kind of high focus on ethical values and relational skills rather than just conformity and the ability to control. And in learning and development, I think we should explore peer-to-peer learning and more transparent skill-based compensation. And of course, we need to also digitize our support processes, but above all, we need to install those mechanisms for agile co-creation and truly serve our employees. And maybe this is eventually the moment to rename human resources, which is a name I think truly does not reflect the value our HR colleagues can bring. But as I said at the beginning, we must be aware that we cannot just copy and paste best practices. As I said, every organization is unique. Hence, more than providing simple answers, it is critical to enable and establish an environment where people can ask the right questions and collectively experiment and evolve. Together, let us liberate our organizations so that over time they will become laboratories of ideas, integrating action and inquiry into everything we do, always sensing and exploring and experimenting whilst we're moving in teams and in peer communities of learning. But there's more. In my experience, adapting the context does not necessarily mean that people will accept ownership. So how can we truly unleash the creativity of our people? And here for decades, we've been trained to see humans as strictly rational consumers in economic markets. And in our businesses, we have treated people like easily replaceable human capital or as exchangeable resources to be controlled. And as a result, more than 75% of employees feel disengaged. So going forward, to build those adaptive learning organizations, I think we truly must put people first. We must relearn to cherish their uniqueness and design our organizations and work to fulfill their basic human needs, their sense of orientation, belonging, autonomy, and self-esteem. True success can only be when every human being at work has the ability to develop, use their creativity, and have impact, when agency becomes activism. And frankly, this will not be automatic. In a world where we are all required to wear so many different masks, our public identity has become quite disengaged from our inner life. And it has become challenging just to be with ourselves and with each other, resulting in dualisms and tensions. And I think fundamentally, everything we call mental health is related to interpersonal processes. All problems are relationship problems, which I think also explains a bit what we are seeing currently with the impact of the pandemic. Therefore, in deliberately developmental organizations, we deliberately invest in helping people to go below that proverbial iceberg, individually and collectively, and to recognize their own biases and needs, anxieties, attachment styles, defense and coping mechanisms, to grow their ability to work with and care for others, to co-generate and that meaning and value in service of the community. Our inner game is our outer game. Whereas Frederic Laloux once said, we can only go far into the we if we fully inhabit the I. And finally, by matching desires and competencies of individuals with those meaningful activities, we can enable flow and personal development and ultimately happiness at work. When people are happier, they don't just act smarter, they are smarter. Yet I think happiness, as Aristotle once suggested, is not about pleasure or wealth or income, how many followers we have on Twitter, always getting everything we want, but about growth. It's a matter of growing our character in a lifetime of personal development, the cultivation of those virtues that make us good human beings. And I think this brings us to culture. Let me ask you, do you feel you can truly bring your ideas to the front rows of your organization? Because if not, frankly, you're not alone. Only about 20% of people believe their opinion counts, and 70% report new ideas are met with hostility. And I think, as people often suggest, culture is a little bit the way we do things around here, which arguably is not very precise. And for me, culture relates in particular to how we treat each other and what we truly care for. And if we want to develop human-centric organizations, we need to actively foster an environment of psychological safety, openness, community, and compassion, where people truly commit to co-elevate. Culture is not just that poster on the cafeteria wall, right? So I think, have a look at your calendars and check how many hours you are spending on culture with your teams every month, especially in these new ways of working. The bottom line is that we have to become intentional and conscious about culture, not only inside the organization, but across our entire ecosystem. And not only from the top, but inclusively across all teams. We need to collectively create that space to revise and explicitly contract our organizational culture. As they say, culture eats strategy for breakfast. If we fail to manage our culture manages us. We are that breakfast. And I strongly believe that this requires a change in metaphors. Instead of optimizing organizations as machines or behaviorist training grounds, dividing information and specializing and ruling with carrots and sticks, I think we need to start acknowledging organizations as complex developmental systems, as living organisms with minds and hearts and souls, where deep emotional bonds of community and trust prevail, and where individuals and teams experience and learn and develop together in service of that regenerative purpose, where influence and authority are different from rank and position, and where employees have freedom to experiment, and where many, many more people become their own CEOs, from doing to being, and from fear to love. And more than in structures, methodologies, or tools, the difference lies in core principles. In humanocracies, the business of business is people. And this is frankly where I believe most of our organizations seem stuck. Why? I regret to say it, colleagues and friends, but I believe it's often because of us. The maturity of an organization can never transcend the maturity and consciousness of its leaders. If greater consciousness doesn't operate, a system simply does not possess the stability to let go of the old and transition to a new model. If our definition of success is going up that ladder from VP to SVP to EVP, hierarchy prevails. If we dominate others to uphold our own ego, people around us won't flourish. If we seek to control that uncontrollable, uncertain environment with ever more rigidity, self-organization will perish. And finally, if we try to shrink the complexity of this world to our own cognitive limits, we will fail. In a world of self-organization, there's simply no place anymore for that patriarchal commander-in-chief who rules by positional power and dominance. Agile leaders focus on the why, not the how. Decisions are always made at the lowest possible level, close to the customer. Rather than telling people what to do, leaders today need to become experts in building and sensing and caring for and influencing those organizational systems, in coaching individuals and teams, and in enabling that co-creation and emergence of shared purpose. In such a new world, I think we need chief communicators who earn the respect of their people by making personal sacrifices to serve the collective good, and chief connectors who can create a cultural force field of energy, a little bit like placing their needles as acupuncturists to facilitate the energy flows in an organizational body, fostering that psychological safety and trust, reinforcing transparency and embracing failure, and role modeling gratitude, compassion, and kindness. And such a new transpersonal leadership paradigm is more than just EQ. It integrates intellectual, emotional, and spiritual intelligence. Servant leaders lead beyond the ego, as John Knight writes, allowing time for awareness and reflection rather than always jumping into action, letting go to become vulnerable imperfectionists, and holding that space for others to attain self-mastery and learning. As John Quincy Adams once said, if your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, you're a leader. And frankly, for traditional leaders who have risen up that corporate chain by being in control, that's a difficult challenge. What brought us here won't bring us there. So how can we transcend? What's that breakthrough? And I'm sure, like many of you, I've spent a lot of time in my career trying to become that good leader. Yet nevertheless, if I'm fully honest, for a long time, being right was probably more important than to accept uncertainty and to deeply listen and learn. And I still don't have all the answers. I always say when I was young, I had all the answers. Now I'm old, I got all the questions. But in my personal experience, progression requires vertical development, facing our own shadows and our emotions, letting go of those restrictive mental models, hearing our soul knocking at the ego's door. Responsible leaders, said Manfred Kitz-de-Vries, are not only born, but twice born through a painful process of individuation, where every victory of the self feels a little bit like a defeat for the ego, until we can compassionately see all those facets of an interconnected whole. But above all, I believe we really need to take time to reflect and tap into what really matters to us, feeling how everything is profoundly interconnected, loving ourselves and others for mutual growth, serving all life beyond those confines of our own ego. And similar maybe to adopting a new metaphor for our organizations, we also need to reframe the meaning for our own world and accessing that unique essence of who we are and what we stand for allows us to let go of fears and the desire to control. As Mark Twain once said, the two most important days in your lives are the day you are born and the day you find out why. And I can assure you, once you fully commit yourself to that greater purpose, magically, synchronously, the world around you changes too. And suddenly, leadership is not a tribe of special individuals with special traits and not even a role, but about letting go of that authority and unleashing that unique potential that is in everyone. About people no longer being victims of circumstances, but thriving in the creation of new possibilities. About learning together how to shape a more responsible future. And ultimately, leadership is a distributed and regenerative capability, an ecocentric flow of energy and inquiry, what we collectively are able to bring to life. And not by top-down transformation or big bang organizational restructuring, but evolutionary through networks of teams and that continual co-creation everywhere. And concluding, I want to offer you a final reflection. It took myself many years to acknowledge that sustainable organizational transformation is really only possible through concurrent individual transformation. We are the system. Yet that also means that we all have that power, and I think the responsibility to transform our organizations and our relationships from who we are and how we show up. We can all spark the liberation of organizations, gradually crafting those structures and processes and cultures needed to attain an environment for both individual development and the evolution of that emergent collective purpose. And together, I'm convinced we can compose a new unifying narrative to overcome some of the limitations of that social materialism we have today, where success is not only about money, but compassion, community, and character. But I also had to learn that true purpose is not just beautiful poetry, but also about what we are personally willing to give up or to struggle and suffer for. As St. Augustine once said, hope has two beautiful daughters. Their names are anger and courage. Anger at the way things are and courage to see that they do not remain the way they are. So I really do hope some of you are inspired to seize this historic moment to revise your bearings. The evolution of technology and data poses critical opportunities, but also daunting challenges. This current pandemic lays bare the frailty of our social contract, and the economic lockdowns shine a glaring light on existing inequalities and even create new ones. And my heart really goes out to those seriously impacted by COVID in their lives, their careers, and their health. I think today is an important time for all of us to occupy those front rows of our lives and make conscious choices. As I said at the beginning, we have our toes in the water, but we really need to start pulling through, not as controllers, but as servants, not with a perfect plan, but starting somewhere and adapting and evolving whilst we go. You cannot think yourself into a new way of acting. You must act yourself into a new way of thinking. So finally, a big thank you to all those who have stimulated and influenced my journey to date, and also to Fellow and the whole Craft Hub team and Jose and all the partners for organizing this wonderful virtual summit. And of course, to all you fellow travelers, please do connect and continue the conversation. Let us together roll up our sleeves and jointly reimagine our organizations for positive impact. Let us grow beyond ourselves and overcome those fears to bring more love into this world at a moment where it is desperately needed. Let us spark that fifth revolution to recover better, recover stronger, recover together. We're not leaders because we rule. We're leaders because we truly care. If not us, then who? And if not now, then when? And with that, hopefully we got a few questions and a bit of Q&A coming up, and I'm giving back to Jose. Thank you very much indeed. Stay safe.
Thank you, Oti. Really inspiring to kick off the morning. Lots of good nuggets there. We do have a couple of questions. I just wanted to say again, muchas gracias. So let's kick it off with, so Leha was asking, what was the essay or work that you referenced by Freeman? Do you know?
By who?
By Freeman. You mentioned a work or essay by Freeman.
I need to take that back. It wasn't Freeman for sure.
Okay.
But I will. I'm very happy, by the way, if people want to contact me on LinkedIn and ask the questions. I will also put the transcript and the slides online, so we can, I'm sure, kind of resolve that. And if people are interested in literature or any other pointers, I'm very happy to give them.
Perfect. So then, just to kind of change it up a bit, you mentioned feed forward a couple of times in your presentation. Can you mention a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it's very interesting. And I think Antoinette is actually talking about this later during this conference.
She is.
So there's a lot of research in terms of traditional performance management systems and the practices that kind of work and don't work. And feedback is typically a kind of a retrospective. And it's only in Agile retrospectives, we also look forward in reality. But in a typical feedback conversation, it's like, what have you done in the last 3 months against your targets? And it's very often because it's backward oriented. It doesn't really help you for the struggles to come. And the notion of this feed forward is really to look at what are your strengths? How can you develop and grow? And how can we collectively as a team or individually use those strengths in order to achieve the best outcomes for the challenges that we're having next quarter? So it's really this notion of agility. And if there's something that needs to be said about what happened, let's do that immediately. Let's not wait for the end of the quarter to have that conversation.
Very nice. And yes, we do have a follow-up in the afternoon, so more to come. Daria asked, I would love to hear maybe some personal stories of growing or applying some of the tools, models that you spoke about in your current position, for example.
So models, I mean, there are many models and frameworks, particularly for this leadership development and adult development. What I would recommend, and again, please reach out if you want to have some more information about those. What I have found very, very interesting is Bob Keegan. He talks about the constructive adult development and the different stages. It's also very interesting to look at the gentleman I mentioned, Bill Torbett. He wrote about action inquiry and about a framework for what he calls action logic of leaders. And that is what I've put on the slide there. And then, of course, in the more organizational context, I would certainly suggest, if you haven't read Reinventing Organizations by Frederic Laloux or looked at his many, many videos that are all free on his site, it's definitely worthwhile. And there are lots of good nuggets that Frederic is offering. So I think that I would probably say as a starting point. Of course, there's a lot more out there. But maybe the other thought I always have is we all have all these cognitive frameworks, and we are spending a lot of time in terms of comparing books and comparing notes. In my experience in terms of adult development, the cognitive element is one, but it's certainly not the only one. There seems to always be a concurrence of a cognitive aspect. So we need to understand that there's a door somewhere that we haven't previously seen. Right, so that allows us then to explore and experiment with new things. But there's also this notion of emotional discontent. Right? So it's kind of, we realize through our lives or our work lives that what we are doing is not yielding the right results, or those results are not fully meaningful anymore for us. And that is the second aspect. And the third is really that commitment and will to change. And I think, again, it's in these times are good to sit back and reflect and think about, what do I really stand for? Where do I want to go as a person and as an employee, right? What is my calling? And I think just creating the space for that is very important. And maybe the final suggestion, so I became a coach, and especially a so-called psychodynamic coach. And I found coaching very, very helpful in regards to actually, whilst you're doing it, getting closer to your own emotions and thoughts and the way you interact with others. But also, if you have some people who can provide you with with some coaching and point out those blind spots which you might have, or help you with making sense of a situation, I think that's very valuable. There's a good book that has come out by Keith Ferrazzi, which is called Leading Without Authority, where this notion of co-elevation that I mentioned earlier stems from. Right? Really finding a group of people where you can share those challenges and honestly try to help each other to make sense of them. So those are the thoughts that I would probably offer.
Nice. Thank you. A lot of things there. And yes, I've actually consumed a lot of the content you just mentioned. So it is really powerful. So really good things to look for. So we have another question around, what has been your best experience in an alternative performance management system? How does that work?
My best experience?
Yes. In this alternative performance management, right? When we're talking about learning and kind of growing people from that perspective.
Well, I mean, I have to say, in my team, we've been experimenting with especially this self-reflection, peer reflection, team reflections, and so on. And also investing in more coaching skills of leaders. And I mean, for me personally, it was just beautiful to watch. It is really, really powerful what sometimes happens. And one thing I've experienced is that sometimes just finding a group of peers and creating that safe space to reflect with each other is a lot more powerful than going on training courses or reading books or doing these leadership development trainings, which we typically have, right? And I have to be careful here because I'm sure many people are managing those programs. But I would really, at least as a thing that happens at the same time, it's so important to invest in those self-reflection capabilities. There is no self-organization in my books without having that ability in individuals and in teams. And sometimes we're just very nice with each other, but we're not honestly putting those dynamics on the table. And again, one thing I've realized is that there's anxiety in every team. Every human system has an underlying anxiety. And if as a leader, especially, you're not able to sense it in the first place, but then also to challenge and nudge it so that it is being dealt with in an effective way, it always makes itself visible in ways that are not helping, not fostering the achievement of the purpose of the system. Right, so the ability to work with these under the surface dynamics, I think, is really, really, really important. And it is also something that helps us grow. Right, to be able to bring your whole self to work, so to speak, to be authentic and not always need to kind of put a mask on in order to interact with others is something that I think is very liberating. So again, I've seen some of that happen, but it's also not easy, right? Especially in the work context. So you need to invest in that capability, I would say. But it's beautiful when it happens.
Well, for me, that's actually one of the things that inspires me to become a better leader, right? That kind of interaction, that kind of growth is a mutual thing in that sense as well. Oti, I want to say thank you again. We're going to be sending you this little stretch mug with your portrait on it. Here we go, we're zooming in. This is going to be sent by post to you as a little keepsake from Stretch. Thank you for coming today.
I even look a lot younger there, which is great.
Oh, well, yeah, well, we try, right?